Another day, another tax cut proposal from Donald Trump. At the Detroit Economic Club, he pledged to make interest on car loans fully tax deductible. Now, he already announced this week that he supports ending double taxation for Americans living abroad. Our experts are here to talk about it. Ron Insana, CNBC senior analyst and the CEO of iFi AI. All right, Ron.
Yes, ma'am.
So far, we have got no tax on tips.
Correct.
Social Security benefits, overtime pay, now car loans, and getting rid of double taxation, basically for rich people who live overseas. And all of this is on top of his 2017 cuts.
Which would have to be extended at the end of next year.
Correctamundo. For those who say, oh, he's just a performer, don't take it seriously, it's clownish at best. And for people who do take him seriously, have we heard one serious word about how any of this will be paid for? And
no.
Don't you dare say tariffs.
Well, no, obviously not. And the tariffs would have to be so substantially beyond what even he is proposing to provide any income to the federal government that would offset these expenditures, that they would be unworkable. They'd launch it. It would trigger a trade war, so on and so forth. Even the ones he has on the table as proposals would probably trigger a trade war right now. But no, there is no financing mechanism for any of this thus far. And it's just adding more and more to what's already assumed to be $7.5 trillion in additional debt from the proposals he laid on the table prior to what you just outlined. And some have even suggested it could be as high as $15 trillion in additional debt. So, no.
So what do the old school Republicans that were always all about debt and deficit, and their big complaint is we can't live with the spending of Democrats. We can't live with the spending of Joe Biden, who complained about the pieces about the proposals that we saw in the last 4 years. What do they tell you when we hear the numbers of what Trump will do to the deficit, which is significantly higher than Harris's plans?
Not a word. Not a word. Not a single word.
Well,
and in fact, to be fair, no one is talking about debt and deficits in a meaningful way.
Correct.
I mean, to the vice president's credit, she does have some pay-fors included in her proposals to reduce taxes for people under $400,000, to extend certain aspects of the Trump tax cut, provide child tax credits, and so on and so forth. There are some, as we used to call them, pay-fors in there. But even she would increase the national debt by $1.5 trillion to $3.5 trillion.
$3.5. For people who are wondering what her closing economic message should be, we heard something tonight that might be a good idea. Watch this.
Reason some people think, well, I don't know, I remember that economy when he first came in being pretty good. Yeah, it was pretty good, because it was my economy. We had 75 straight months of job growth that I handed over to him. It wasn't something he did. I had spent 8 years cleaning up the mess that the Republicans had left me the last time. So just in case everybody has a hazy memory, he didn't do nothing except those big tax cuts.
Should they just put this on loop for the next 30 days?
100%. I mean, it's interesting. I'm going to use an old person's word. That was a stem winder of a speech that the former president gave. We have not seen something like that in quite a long time from any political candidate, quite honestly. And in addition to that, the piece that I would add is if you look at the first 3 years of the Trump administration in terms of job growth and GDP growth, they were virtually identical to the last 3 years of the Obama presidency, almost to the number. 2% plus growth, 200,000 jobs per month, virtually identical. So when Donald Trump says that his economy was infinitely stronger or as strong as anything we've ever seen or never seen before in history, however he chooses to characterize it, it just empirically is not true. It's almost identical to the last 3 years of the Obama administration's economic track record.
I want to bring Justin Wolfers into this conversation, professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. Justin, when people are going on and on saying, I can't vote for Kamala Harris because of inflation, yes, she's gone through her policies, her 89-page proposal. You can see it on our website. But would a more effective message for the next 30 days for her be, you don't like inflation under the Biden-Harris administration? Check out what Donald Trump will do. Because this idea that inflation is so bad under her, his plans will make inflation significantly worse.
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things worth calling out. The first, of course, is if what you want to do is reduce inflation, then putting a 10% tax on every imported good that you buy, including, by the way, the imports that are used as intermediate goods for manufacturers to then produce things like cars. Well, by jingo, that's going to be inflationary. We think that'll add about $3,000 to the annual cost of living for a typical American family. And then the thing that no one's really talking about is, remember, Donald Trump has said that he should get a say in what the Federal Reserve does. Now, we actually have an example of a strongman populist who has decided to take over monetary policy recently. That was Erdogan in Turkey. And you can call your friends in Turkey and ask them if they like 60 or 70% inflation. And chances are they'll tell you that having an independent central bank is something to be treasured and something that we should really look after over here.
Well, guess what? People might not be talking about it, but it was going to be my next question because we heard about it today. Yep. Barron's was reporting that one of Trump's advisors, a hedge fund manager, suggested having a shadow Fed chair.
It's funny. Scott Bessent, who
That's who did it, yes.
Worked with George Soros for years and is now a Donald Trump supporter, rather ironically, given how often Republicans blame George Soros for everything that's wrong in the world. This is one of the worst ideas I have ever heard in the 40 years that I've been doing this. We used to have something called the Shadow Open Market Committee, which was a group of private economists who would critique the Fed on a regular basis, but they had no functional role. They were not an arm of government. They were independent private economists who would just talk about what the Fed was doing. Some of them had been on the Fed. Having someone look over your shoulder as chairman of the Federal Reserve and possibly be chairman in waiting is a horrible idea. The independence of a central bank, as Justin just said, is really key to a strong monetary policy that promotes, as ours does, maximum sustainable employment and stable prices. And this would cut away at that rather dramatically.